Welcome to the 34th episode of the GameFor Podcast. In this episode, still recording from home, we'll be talking about getting started in 3D printing in tabletop gaming. I'm Adam.
I'm Matt.
And we're part of GameFor. This is the GameFor Podcast for connecting tabletop gamers and for helping people get into the tabletop gaming hobby. We kind of talk about all different aspects of it, from the board gaming side, the collectible card game side, the role-playing game side, and the tabletop wargaming miniatures side. All aspects of tabletop gaming and how to get into it. That's what we like to talk about here on the GameFor Podcast. And we've been doing stuff in our own personal lives, gaming-wise, since the last show, a fortnight ago. Matt, what kind of stuff have you been doing?
Well, no updates on the Imperial Assault D&D campaigns this time. Just holiday weekend and going back to school for kids. It kind of killed that. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks. But so far nothing with that. But I did start playing a new board game, which actually has been a while since I've played a new board game. Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid.
From Renegade Games?
Yeah, Renegade Games.
Yep.
Not a game I would have probably picked off the shelf. I was a little bit older at the time for Power Rangers. My brother and sister, I think, were about the right age, but I was a little bit old for it. So, but holy cow, I was not expecting to like it as much as I do, and I really like it. I've played several games now. Played the first game with GameFor Jason, so Jason that works with us, and then brought it with us to our family vacation over this holiday weekend in the States. And we played it there with the kids and stuff. So,
And so you guys were explaining it to me. I didn't realize this. It's kind of a co-op style game, and it's sort of a tower defense, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the nice thing. I love playing co-op with family, because then I don't feel like I'm destroying them. I can actually feel like I can game. And this is a tough game too. Like, I have yet to win. So I mean, I'm probably not doing it super well, but I thought I was doing okay. But
so it's a co-op game. These are still just one winner, or is it that all the players win, or else the board wins?
It's the players win. So like Power Rangers versus the bad guys, and like even stuff that I'm remembering from the shows, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense of how the show, like, the theme was really well brought into it, and then like the actual gameplay. I mean, it's some good strategy. Like, my family and I were struggling, and we even tried it on like a slightly easier version, and it still wasn't super easy for us to like destroy stuff. A lot of like risk versus reward, item management and stuff. So and
they've made a zillion expansions for it, haven't they?
And I just saw that they've got like a whole bunch more coming out next month, and it's kind of crazy.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah,
the stuff I've seen of it, like the artwork and all that kind of stuff. Like, again, I was a little too old for the show as well, but just like, I know there's a bunch of comic books and things like that are based off of it now, and they're able to use a lot of the artwork from that, and it looks amazing as far as the visuals and stuff like that. I don't know that I've ever played a tower defense board game. I've played them, like phone games or computer games, but I've never played one I don't think is a board game. So I'm not completely familiar with what that's all about, but it sounds really kind of interesting. And I think that the co-op thing also, you're right. Like, especially if you're playing with a group. I've got a friend who's got a gaming group, and he's always looking for co-op games, because if you make a game that's not co-op, then somebody gets their nose out of joint because they're losing or they feel like they're getting picked on. But when you're all working together, it works a lot better. So I see that.
Right, because then it's like, if somebody's particularly not doing well, and you're like, oh, the game's really screwing you up,
Right, yeah. You can blame the game and not your friends. That makes sense, exactly. Absolutely. And then what other kind of stuff have you been doing besides playing that game?
That's been pretty much it. I've been printing up some more characters, like figures and stuff for D&D, mostly, and doing some more modeling. But not a ton more outside of that. I've been pretty busy. So how about you, though?
Well, I'm still working on my Nurgle warband for Warcry, and the reason it's taken so long is because I only paint them basically 6 hours a week, and I'm painting them on Twitch. So I paint them on Friday mornings at 10 a.m. Central, for 3 hours, and then Monday nights at 7 p.m. Central for 3 hours. And while I'm painting, I'm also chatting a lot because people are asking questions and stuff like that. And there's people watching and whatnot. So it's not a particularly quick process because I'm whether I'm answering questions about those models or answering questions about paint and brushes and all kinds of different things. And so that's kind of the point. It's not the point to like fire through these projects super crazy quickly. It's the point to hopefully be somewhat entertaining and answer some questions and things like on Twitch and get people involved and get people into the hobby. So that's helpful. But yeah, so they're getting closer. I did finally start working on some skin lesions, for lack of a better word. The Nurgle guys are pretty kind of falling apart. They've got Nurgle in Age of Sigmar has got a lot of just ickiness, a lot of disease and skin bumps and boils and all kinds of crazy stuff like that. So I started working on some of that. But I'm getting pretty close on them. I'm going to say at least 3/4 there, if not a little bit further along.
Oh, that's not bad.
The thing is, though, is that there's 5 guys in that group, and then there's also this one big guy who rides a bug, and I've barely touched him. He's like primed, and I've done some base coating, so I really need to get on him too. But the other 5 guys are at least 3/4 done, so there's that. And then as far as side projects, things I'm not doing on stream, which means I can usually do them a bit quicker while like listening to a podcast or listening to an audiobook or something like that. There's this set that Games Workshop came out with, a terrain set called the Battle Sanctum, which has got this gorgeous, humongous statue of a kind of like a Sisters of Battle, and she's got like wings. I think it's supposed to be Celestine, who's one of the heroes of the Sisters of Battle. That's the like kind of female Space Marine sort of, and so I built her, and then there was a bunch of gaps I kind of had to try to fill, which I was pseudo successful on. And then I cleaned it all up, or I primed it and everything. I wanted to go like a sandstone look, and I did some real subtle washes that I kind of blended with some different mediums so they wouldn't be too dark. And I actually tried a bunch of different techniques and even some edge highlighting and stuff. And that's done. It just needs a varnish, but that's cool. I'll probably put some pictures of it on Instagram once I get it varnished. Then Reaper Bones. You're familiar with Reaper Bones?
Yep.
They have a line called Reaper Bones Black, which is not the white, kind of slightly softer bendier. It's like a little bit stiffer, but not like as hard as, say, like Games Workshop style plastic.
Not full,
but it's
plastic. Yeah, but it's there. I get it there. Yeah,
it's pretty stiff though. It's pretty rigid, so it's nice. And there's this one model that I just came across. Somebody else was like working on it on something I was watching on YouTube, or I was flipping through Instagram. I don't know. And I saw this model and I was like, whoa, that guy's super cool. I need to get me one of those. And he is called a Maggot Crown Ogre Juggernaut, which I can literally only remember if I write it down or put it on a screen or something like that. It's just the weirdest name, but it's just a super cool model. He's just like this huge kind of ogre in like full plate. So he's just massive. And then he has an ogre face, but it's just an ogre skull. Like, I don't know where his skin went. I don't know what the story is. So he's just got like an ogre skull coming out of this massive plate mail. He's got a huge giant club. And I had primed him several months ago with a bad can of rattle can primer. And then he got all fuzzy, and then I had to strip it. I had to strip the primer off. And then I went and primed him again with the airbrush later on, and then also airbrushed silver. And so, yeah, I've just been basically kind of speed painting him, but I really like how he's turning out. And then another side project is the Indominus box set that Games Workshop sent out to me and to other content creators. They released it at the end of July. It's got a bunch of Necron stuff in it, and I painted up a bunch of Necron stuff on my Twitch, but there was some stuff I just didn't use on Twitch, but I built it from the Necron side, and I'm going to use it for something else. But I'm kit bashing. It's this big, tall, kind of War of the Worlds sort of looking robot. Instead of 3 legs, he's got 4, but he's real tall. Yeah,
I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
So I've modified him and put a lot of bones and skulls and all kinds of stuff over him, and I'm painting him all different and modified him quite a bit. So that guy's getting along pretty well. And then lastly, another side project that I finished, which was these old school metal models from a company called Pig Iron Productions. They're called the Colony Militia is what they are, and they're kind of pseudo sci-fi. every person's carrying at least like 6 or 7 pouches. I don't know what's with all the pouches, but there's a lot of pouches. They like that. And so they're kind of cool models that are, I mean, they're not computer sculpted. You can tell they're hand sculpted and whatever, but they're still, they've got a lot of character. And so I really quickly speed painted them, mostly with contrast colors. And then last week, Friday or Saturday, I took them to my studio and I set up a bunch of lights and terrain stuff and took a bunch of kind of fancy pictures of them, like in, like on a game board. So they look like they're not just like on a background, it looks like they're
right.
in the world, and put those up on Instagram as well. And so that was a lot of fun, but
very cool.
Yeah. So that's kind of where that's at.
Nice.
But I've also, like, recently when I was on Twitch, I was like this most recent episode on Monday night. I had a bunch of people ask about 3D printing, and I had some 3D printed stuff on my desk to show them a little bit. And it made me think that this would be not a bad idea to talk about, because there was a lot of questions. And I think that there's probably a lot of questions out there in our listening audience, people who are interested in 3D printing. Is it something that they should get into? What do you do with it? How expensive is it? All kinds of different problems. And you've become kind of, I think, in our group, probably the more 3D printing expert on stuff. I own a 3D printer, but you own multiple 3D printers of multiple types. So
it's become a habit.
Yeah, exactly. It does. It becomes a secondary hobby, which is something we also probably should talk about. But so for people that are completely unaware, like, what does 3D printing, what does that mean? What does it do?
So 3D printing is also called like additive manufacturing. So other, like if you think of like a CNC machine, like a laser guy, stuff like that, you're taking a big piece of material and you're cutting that down. Additive processing, you're basically starting with nothing and then slowly adding material to it to build what you want. And there's basically, for at least at the consumer level, like, we're going to try not to go to the, like, here's for $50,000 what you could, some of the cool stuff that they are doing now. But generally, when people are talking about consumer level 3D printing, they're talking about two types: FDM, which is usually like a filament printer. Think of it kind of like a special, like a 3D CNC machine with a hot glue gun attached to it. So it's melting the filament and then spreading that around and as
squirting
it
it through a tiny little nozzle. And there's a kind of a robot arm that kind of moves it. Yeah. So you've got your stepper motors that move it around and then slowly builds up layer after layer after layer. And depending on the quality, you've got, thinner layers, so you have more detail, and that goes, and then it builds it up from there. So that's kind of, it's building it slice by slice by slice. You got it's Eiffel Tower. It starts out doing the 4 feet, and then it works that kind of slowly up until it gets to the middle part, and then it goes all the way.
Then it'll do like a little squirt here, a little squirt here, a little squirt around the 4 corners, and then just kind of builds it up out of there. The other one that's fairly common now is UV resin printing, which is basically, it's kind of like a CAT scan layer. So think of it almost like a mini TV or a cell phone size LCD that flashes a CAT scan of that layer. So it's usually one color.
So but it's like in the bottom of the vat, right?
Right.
Like there's a vat of resin, and it's got a clear bottom to it.
Yep, and you pour in all your liquid resin into that, and then it shines the light up for that layer, and for a certain set time, that will set that, cause that fraction of a millimeter layer to cure, and then it basically then lifts it up, lets more resin get underneath it, closes it, puts it back down, and
because it's everything's upside down in resin, right?
Yeah, so it prints and it kind of pulls it out.
Right. Whereas like when you're using the FDM, the filament printer, you're starting from the bottom and usually building as you get taller and things are right side up. Whereas resin's upside down, where there's the plate that's actually pulling it slowly out of the resin vat, but the light keeps shining from the underneath to show like each slice, and then you pull this upside down thing out. And so it's really interesting to watch, like time lapses and stuff like that. Where you see
and it's
it
weird
happen really quickly.
and usually with the UV ones, you'll see like they're usually like a red or a green or an orange, kind of like semi-transparent cover, and that's usually a UV resistant cover to keep outside light from accidentally
On the
flashing in.
on the 3D printer itself, you mean it's got like
Yep.
windows that are a certain color to block out UV light?
Yep.
Yeah, because otherwise your resin would get hard. Like if you had it near a window, I suppose your resin would get hard, like right there in the vat. You don't want that.
Yeah, you get light bleed, and then usually when you're done with that, unlike the filament where you just kind of wait for it to cool off and you take it off the plate, you then have to kind of wash it off to get all the uncured resin off of it. And there's a whole process to that. Sometimes with water, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but you can do it with water. But usually you're using like an IPA alcohol bath,
Isopropyl alcohol, yep.
and then putting it under like a UV light or out in the sun to fully cure the resin hard, because it's still kind of soft when it comes out.
Right. So it's the UV light that's what causes the resin, the fluid resin, to turn into a solid. And to make sure that it is totally cured at the end, after you've cleaned it all off, you need to either put it in one of those UV light kind of chambers, or if you live someplace that's real nice and bright outside, you can set it out on your picnic table, I suppose, as long as the squirrels don't steal it. And then that kind of light can also help.
Yeah,
I know, the squirrels.
Exactly.
We've had squirrels steal all of our tomatoes this year, so that's been fun.
Oh.
And we only have the one tomato plant, but still, I think they've been trying to get water out of them. I don't know, but the tomatoes are all gone.
Huh.
Anyway.
We have rabbits.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a fence, but once the plants started getting too big and started going outside the garden fence, they would try to nibble and get some green beans and stuff like that.
Sure. Should 3D print like a nice lattice to put over the edge of the fence so they can't get in there.
That would be a big lattice.
That we all sure, yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of the basic.
So those are the two types of home printing. There are also 3D printers that use a super crazy fine layer of like nylon powder, and then a laser burns each layer, and it's kind of like it's sort of like resin, but a little different, and all that stuff. But those are like those are the machines where you're looking at $20,000 to $50,000.
At least now, because like
I said,
now 20 years ago were $20,000 to $50,000 machines too. So
Formlabs does have what they call technically a home system. It's just that it costs $20,000, but it's it's the printer, it's the machine to reclaim all the powder that didn't get used, and then you can recycle it back into the other machine, and it's like some other sort of other machine, and it's a whole system. And I watched a video about it once, which is the only reason I was like, that's interesting. They're like, it's only $20,000, and I'm like, oh, that's not good. That's more
and just this weekend, I think it was just this weekend that Elegoo just announced or just released their new print, wash, and curing station that you basically take the build plate. It fits the same build plate, and so you just unscrew your build plate like you normally would to take it off to peel everything, but it then fits perfectly into this next machine. You tighten it back down, and then it dips it back and forth to wash it, and then kind of brings it up and I don't know if it rotates it. I would hope it rotates it somehow, but
either it rotates or the light might rotate.
Oh, maybe that's how it's doing. Because it does have like a wall of lights and stuff to do it, but it's supposed to do everything all at once.
That's kind of a cool idea. Yeah,
yeah, and it's like $120 only. So
we're still in the situation of everything being still pretty new in this technology. I mean, like a resin printer, like we're talking about, these slightly fancier, higher detail resin printers where they pull the stuff out of the goo, those were $5,000 5 years ago, if not even 4 years ago.
Right.
And it's only in the last 2 years, that resin printers have gotten to the point where somebody told me in my Twitch chat yesterday, somebody told me that I was talking about resin printers and how they can be, $400 or $500. And one guy's like, well, I just saw one recently that was under $200, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Any phobic or whatever. Yeah. It's under 200 now.
Yeah. Anycubic maybe?
Anycubic, yes, that one.
Anycubic and Frozen are two separate companies. Yeah.
So,
what kind of stuff do you print though when you're printing stuff? Like what do you for gaming? Like, there's a lot of people who are in gaming who like 3D printing, just because I think that there's a Venn diagram that has a lot of overlap there, just for people. But like, what type of stuff do you generally kind of print?
Especially for like the filament. Really, you can build whatever you want as long as it fits on that size.
Hmm.
And if you're using kind of a standard size, like a 200 by 200 or so millimeter or larger base, a lot of your models and stuff are going to be kind of set up to be on that size. I
Hmm.
mean, sky's kind of the limit to based on your um, your need
Yeah,
and what
sure.
kind of models you want to find and
I mean,
use.
like, and it's not
But
just for people who are into miniatures, right? Like, it's not just for like,
right,
you and
like
me. Like, if you, we were
card
talking about this
dividers,
before.
card
Exactly.
pieces,
Yeah, like if you've
like
got some sort of board game and the cards always get squirrely in the box and get all over the place, you could just you could, design, or somebody out there probably has already made that shape that you just, and it's called an STL file. The computer file that you need to then print from is called an STL file.
yep,
And so you just need to get access to the STL file, and then you have to
yeah,
slice it using a piece of software that's designed for your printer, and then send it to the printer. So yeah,
right.
there's a lot of things out there for board gaming. I know I've seen 3D printed like deck boxes for like Magic, those types of games. Um, but generally, it is more for the most part, miniatures, and also D&D type of games, RPGs, if you play with miniatures with your RPGs.
Yeah,
um
so more of the physical
yeah.
looking ones. I mean, Magic, you could do some. There's some cool counters and card holders and deck things that you can do.
Hmm.
But yeah, those are the main ones. Board games, you could do a lot of people are using them to kind of enhance their games. Like I'm seeing some beautiful stuff. Just like Settlers of Catan, even though probably half
Yeah,
the board
i've
gamers
seen
out
a
there like. But I mean,
I've seen a
the
lot of
full
really
immersive
cool
game.
3D printed Settlers of Catan pieces, so that you've got the whole actual three-dimensional like board with the different stuff and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's people out there that are doing like Gloomhaven, like all the pieces that are currently cardboard, doing it so
Hmm.
you can 3D print all the pieces. Or Imperial Assault, we were doing like there's the cardboard little tokens for like the not modules, but like access consoles.
Hmm.
And one of our friends, he found 3D printed versions, and so we have like full size that stand up next to the models and stuff, and it really
So
kind
it's
of
not
makes it
just a
feel cooler.
little cardboard chip next to the model that has like a access point or computer
Yeah,
console.
the
It's an
actual
actual
little computer
three-dimensional
being.
thing. Nice.
Yep, the doors are 3D printed and even have like the slide out so that as the doors open or close, you can take that in and out. And
Hmm. And then, so like we said, like obviously, if you're into terrain, for whether it's your buildings for wargaming, or there's tons of companies out there that are making these STL files that are modular for like dungeons. Like if you want to build a dungeon, you can
yep,
print all the tiles, and then they snap together with these little clips, and then you can paint them, and then have this crazy modular dungeon that you and your friends can play D&D in, and move the figures through and say, okay, I'm over here, I'm this far away from that guy, and this, that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And those look amazing, and there's tons and tons of different companies out there making them, and some of them even have like spaces for you to put LED lights in them, so you can make the torches twinkle and all kinds of stuff. It's just astounding the amount of work that people are putting into it, and the benefit to it, to some degree, frankly, is that you can buy the stuff relatively inexpensively, because there's no shipping, there's no manufacturing. You just get a file, and then you do all
right.
the manufacturing on your side. And
Yeah, you're
so
buying and shipping the material, or like for me, I just found a local company that does filament, so I don't even have to
yeah.
ship filament if I don't want to.
Yeah, no, that was very cool as well. So yeah, the
But yeah,
FDM, the filament stuff, is better for bigger terrain
larger
style
items. Yeah,
items and things like that. Yeah, but
yeah.
it's
I
not so
mean,
great for little people.
you can do them, but yeah, they're not going to come out like great quality. You can
Hmm.
do some stuff to help it a little better. You can really play around with it to use a smaller nozzle and small lower things to get a lot better. But
Hmm.
it's still not going to be quite as nice as like the UV resin. The UV resin ones are, I mean, they're
Yeah,
basically naked eye quality. You're
yeah.
not going to be able to
I
tell the difference.
I've seen a lot of like, well, I own some UV resin stuff now, where I'm looking at it with a very critical eye. I'm looking very closely at it, and I'm barely able to see any kind of little striations or layers. And part of that, with resin at least, is the way that the model is sort of oriented. You don't just lay them down flat. on the plate and just go, I'm going to print it that way. From what I've been reading recently, the best thing you do is you kind of tilt them at an angle, and frequently with the face pointing up, because then
Yeah, nothing
the
sticks out of their face.
right. And the way that if you take these models, when they have parts that hang out and go out over a big distance, you have these
Right.
things called supports, and the software automatically can put in the little supports. Well, you have to cut the supports away after you're done printing, whether it's for 3D printing like filament stuff or whether it's resin, right? But you don't want those. You don't want to have to pull that stuff away from the face, because then you have these little extra little pieces where it was kind of connected. It's almost like perforated to some degree. At least, well,
Yeah.
not so much maybe with
Even,
resin, but with like with FDM, I know that there's basically you can just pull it off usually.
yeah,
The
and the resin
supports.
is it depends on if you're doing it before or after you cure.
Hmm.
I typically try to do it before I cure because it's softer and usually
Mm.
comes off fairly smooth.
Hmm.
But
Makes sense.
the disadvantage there is because it's not fully cured, the models are pretty fragile, and I've
Yeah,
definitely have broken some
sure.
taking that off. So there's times when I'll cure it with it on, or if like I'm shipping it to somebody, I usually keep them on just to give it a little bit more rigidity to it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
because
for the
then
most
that
part, you can
person can cut off the supports and all that stuff, and then
exactly.
it's on them, and then there you
Yeah, and
go.
there's a whole bunch of style to how do you do your sports and where you do your sports and how strong you make the
Nuance.
sports and so
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
I still cursed it. I lost a print last night, a little piece. Pulling out of the resin, it was flat enough. It must have created a little bit of a suction, so the supports were there, but the actual piece had fallen off
Oh,
back into the resin.
yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, it's not. I was going to say it's not as easy as using a paper printer, but we've all used paper printers and they still kind of stink in 2020. They're not great. Like I just tried printing something recently, like a receipt, something I bought online. I wanted to print the receipt, and my printer upstairs was just like, "Nah, I'm not taking any new business today, thank you." And so that's just the way it kind of works. Um, but yeah, the UV stuff is cool. It's got a lot of super high detail and things like that. And it can be very smooth. But again, it's also something you want to do small pieces with. You wouldn't want to do a big terrain piece with it, I would think, because of partially the cost, which is there's a bunch of different downsides to both of these types of printing, right?
right.
Like with FDM, like with the filament type of printing, what kind of downsides are there generally?
Um, One is real depends on your environment or where you are. Like if you're
Hmm.
gonna have an FDM, you can't just go stick it out in your garage or in your basement or attic um, and just be completely fine there all the time, depending on where you live, because temperature, especially temperature changes or
Hmm.
humidity, can really, depending on what material you're using, can really affect it. You can get some materials that are a little bit better at preventing humidity issues. You can also use like a food dehydrator and they actually have filament dehydrators, which are basically food dehydrators just renamed so that people buy them more
Sure, yeah, yeah.
to
Because
dry them
yeah, like
back out.
I mean, the tip is what gets hot, so that
Mhm.
the filament as it goes through gets melted, so that it can be fluid and then be kind of pushed onto the places. And you get very, very specific about the actual temperature. So if all of a sudden your basement, in my case, is in the winter in the 50s, whereas in the summer it's in the high 60s, early, low
Yeah,
70s, that variance, just the room temperature, will cause differences and
it's usually
changes in
not
your
too
print.
bad. Like long changes aren't too bad, but like say
Hmm.
you have it sitting there and people are walking by it, or a door opens or a window's open or something like that, a
Hmm.
sudden change
Oh,
will
okay.
it causes it to react more, and suddenly you'll have your adhesion will fail, so the layers aren't sticking together, and then suddenly you get what they call spaghetti. It
Oh,
stops
yeah, I've seen
sticking,
that.
and you just get the string everywhere.
It just goes all
Um,
over the place. Yeah.
yeah, or it gets too hot all of a sudden, and then you've got some over melting and warping and lifting and stuff from the
Hmm.
corners and stuff like that, which kind of basically ruins it as well. So
Yeah, yeah.
there's ways to get around that. You can do like the IKEA lack tables, which are the small like end tables that cost like $10
Yeah.
US, with glass windows, and there's a few other things that people have
Yeah,
gone
people
through.
are well, and again, these are generally crafty people to begin with because they're getting into this whole concept of 3D printing. So they are building their own kind of like table to put the 3D printer on, and they're putting sides on it so it stays a little bit more temperature or a little bit less temperature variant, which makes a lot of
Right.
sense. So yeah, and then humidity is also a thing. I know that the filament that I have purchased has always come in like a vacuum sealed type of bag.
Yeah, and you get the little silicone gel
Hmm.
packets
Yeah,
and stuff.
and
So,
again, that's to keep it dry because otherwise it will sort of swell a little bit if it's kind of humid, right?
yep. And then when it melts inconsistently. It will even pop with that moisture coming out of it, kind of like if you've been around a campfire with wet wood, where it's
Mm,
popping and cracking and stuff. It'll
yeah,
actually do that inside, which is not good.
not good for the overall process.
Yeah, usually not.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
And then
and then overall the FDM printers, I feel they're getting better. They're get like every model that comes out is easier and better and stuff like that. But there are so many mods and tweaks to try to get, depending on what you're trying to print well, that you
I
can
when
do. And
when you
I
first
feel
started getting into FDM, I just remember all the like little tiny packages of springs and little tiny packages of nuts and bolts and different changes in and you were kind of almost trying to hot rod it a little bit. And I
yeah,
think that a lot of people trying to squeeze as much performance out of FDM printers as possible do that. Like my FDM printer, I just like align the plate or whatever, calibrate, and I
right.
don't otherwise touch it. But then also I don't get maybe necessarily prints that are as good as yours, but I am just looking for something. Whereas it seems with resin, there's not nearly any kind of hot rodding. It's pretty much
Not really. I mean, yeah, you can use some
yeah,
different chemicals and different cleaning processes and different
sure.
resins. But oh no, it's I mean, like from print, like the first time I printed, it took me less than 30 minutes to print, and it came out spectacular the first time. And there's been
Like you
very
mean from the time that you set it up till the time that you started printing?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so it's been pretty much hands off of that after that. Like I even like went into the modeling program that slices everything up to the proper slices, and entered the times that the resin thing had on the side of the resin for times, curing times for like first layer and additional layers. Entered
Hmm.
those times in, and then was like, yeah, that pretty much is all I had to do. Whereas like I am still tweaking everything on my filament to depending on what I'm using for material. Like I was printing out some ear bands, so that I was using a product called TPU, which is kind of more rubbery, so it's
Hmm.
flexible. So I was doing like the ear savers things that go behind your ears for the masks, so that
Oh,
the
for
mask
like
not
yeah,
behind
like
your ears. Yeah.
yeah, for like the
So,
coronavirus masks and stuff like that. Yeah.
yep. So and then I was like, and because I had that, I was printing up some stuff for a friend. They had a piece that what they bought an RV that they're overhauling, and there's some pieces they needed that I figured out how to model and print,
Hmm.
and but that flexible thing was completely different animal than you know the other stuff I've used, and so
Yeah, no, I could see that.
and so I was looking up, I was having a specific issue where it was crinking, and I was trying to figure out why, and found that yeah, there's parts I could 3D print to make it print a little bit better. Of course, that's the thing. You just keep printing parts for parts to build more parts.
I
So
mean, I knew a guy that, again, the earlier days of 3D printing, like he bought a small, relatively inexpensive printer, and then he used it to print new parts to basically build a bigger printer. Like that's what he did. Like he's into, tinkering, and he's an
yep,
electronics person and all that stuff. And so this was easily still probably 5, 6 years ago. And he was like one of the first people I knew who had a 3D printer. The first thing he did with his 3D printer was build himself a bigger 3D printer. So he just, printed the parts that he needed and then went to the hardware store to buy like those long kind of screws basically that make the stepper motors, and you've got to buy the stepper motors and you got to buy the
yep.
wire, but all the structure and stuff like that you could 3D print. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like, and so we talked a little bit about downsides with the FDM style printers. What about with UV resin style printers?
So the main thing that people complain about with the resins is the smell and the chemicals being used. It's a lot more toxic than most of your FDM. Like some of the
Hmm.
FDM, like some of the exotic stuff, you can get into concerns because of your temperatures you have to melt at and stuff
It's
like that.
basically melting it, yeah, and so you can get some vapors.
and vapors, like especially if you're doing like I believe like ABS and stuff like that. But
Yep.
most 95% of the users out there don't have to worry about that.
Hmm.
Whereas resin, at least right now, that's pretty much across the board. You've got a strong smell, you've got chemicals. You usually need to wear gloves, which
Hmm.
and that's the one thing that is like the coronavirus is like set back 3D printing prices back like 6 months because a lot of like the materials and stuff, because they're cleaning everything with IPA and wearing
Right.
gloves and all and wearing masks, all that
And
stuff is
and
hard to
and
find.
gloves and isopropyl alcohol were both, and they're still not easy to find, but they were real hard to find back
And their
in like
IPA is
May.
still super, super expensive. Like
Hmm.
normally you like pre-COVID, for resin printing, you would just take a big bottle of gallon bottle of IPA, and that's what you dunk all your stuff in. And then after a few weeks, you would just dump it out and get another bottle because it costs a
Hmm.
couple dollars. And now, I mean, you're probably like 20-30 bucks for a gallon if you can even find it that big.
And what's the percentage on the isopropyl alcohol?
Like usually you're doing like 90%, I
Okay.
believe.
Because I saw a bottle this is pre-COVID. I saw a bottle at the hardware store of 99% that was a
Yeah,
gallon bottle, but it was like $23. And that was even back then. I mean, now you
yeah.
probably can't even find it. But you don't need the 99% stuff to do the cleaning here. You need stuff that's above 90 roughly.
Well, yeah, I think it might be 99. I don't. I honestly, I haven't used it because when I started getting into resin was
Hmm.
around COVID, so I went right to the water curable, washable,
Water washable, yeah. So that's
which
the thing too, that there's a newer kind of resin out there that you don't have to clean with alcohol. You can clean it with water.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's more expensive. Like you're talking like nearly, probably double for the resin, if not even
Oh,
slightly
really?
more than that,
Wow.
depending on which resin you get. But when you factor in all the stuff I'm not using for chemicals and the smell's a lot less there, like if I'm not
Ye-
in the immediate vicinity, I don't smell it. Um,
Yeah, I've heard that too. Is that the water washable stuff has less of an odor?
Plus, I made sure like I paid extra and get the pro. I used the Elegoo Mars. I paid a little bit extra. Got the pro model because it has a charcoal filter built into it.
Oh, an air filter.
To
Yeah.
Yeah, so it cleans it coming out already there too. So
Hmm.
most of the time, I don't really smell it except for when I'm cleaning a print or filling up or whatever. Um,
Sure.
so not nearly as bad. And then when I figure in like the cost of not having the chemicals and all the extra gloves and stuff that I don't have to use all the time, it for me it came out to about a wash.
Yeah. No, I can see that. I
No,
mean, like the not having to have the isopropyl alcohol, not having to have like so much concern about sticky resin all over the place. And yeah, and you're right. And the smell, like honestly, for me, I made a video about this on my YouTube channel a year or so back, about how I wasn't really planning on buying a resin printer because the smell was kind of a big deal, and I don't have like I would have to put it in the basement, and then it would kind of cause some issues throughout the house. And we've got some cats; they can't just go
yeah,
and open a window, though as much as they wish they could. But Yeah, so there's that. But now with the water washables now, and the prices keep coming down, and all this new stuff, and the air filters and stuff, I'm always like, oh god, So it's,
it's
but it's it is another hobby. That's another big deal for people to understand. Is it's not just, even though resin printing. Would you say that resin printing is easier than FDM printing?
um to get maybe what the quality is that you're thinking of when you're like, oh, I'm
Hmm.
going to 3D print this. I would say it's easier and quicker for a person to get through it once they've got the process figured out. Um, but yeah, like you're not doing as many you're not really doing a lot of modifications and everything else. So it
Hmm.
seems a little bit more user friendly at that point.
On the
But
back end, there's more cleaning up and curing and all that kind of stuff. But on the front end, there's less adjusting
yeah, you
server motors and all
right.
that jazz.
Yeah, the
Hmm.
leveling is a lot easier.
Hmm.
It's ridiculously easier.
Yeah. It's also, is it faster as well than normal? I mean, obviously
Well,
you're generally printing things that are
it,
smaller, but The thing is the plate can image across the entire plate all in the same
Right,
time.
right.
Whereas with a
So
3D
really,
printer with filament, it has to draw every layer. And so if you have a lot of stuff on the layer, it has to draw every layer. Whereas with the light, it's just shine the light and
yeah,
then stop.
exactly. So yeah, the
Yeah.
filament printer, the more mass that you're printing, the longer it takes.
Hmm.
Resin printing is really just the height.
Yeah.
Like if I print one little pole that sticks way up in the air, that's a quarter of a millimeter thick, little
Right.
versus a giant, a bunch of log stumps that are 2 millimeters high. The log stumps are going to get done way faster because it doesn't have to go as many layers. It takes
Right. Exactly.
no, like for filament, it usually you don't fill up your print area all the time, except unless you're like, oh, this is going to be running overnight, so I'm going to run 10 hours, and I'm okay with it running overnight because I
Sure.
followed all the safety precautions and other disclaimers that I probably need to mention.
Hmm.
But normally you'll be like, oh, I'm just going to print this one thing because it'll be faster. Whereas the resin, you're like, well, I might as well just print everything, and it's as long as
Right.
it's around the same height, it's not going to affect your time at all.
Because printing one tiny thing that's an inch high versus printing an entire plate full of tiny things that are 1 inch high takes the same amount of time. Because again, it's the
Mhm.
vertical. So yeah, whereas yeah, you're right. With something that's 3D printed, if it's a really tiny thing and you want to print one of them, it will be way faster than trying to print 10 of them all on the same plate because it has to go through and draw each one separately. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's something to think about as well, depending on what you want to do with it. So where do you think? Like, do you think that like for good printers to start with, let's say you were going to spend, I don't know, $200 to $300, let's say,
Yeah. So
you're
that's,
not going to
I
go
mean, that's
crazy and
really all.
spend 5,000, but
Yeah, really. That I mean, for under $300, that's really where you could get a quality that you're really going to like.
mhm.
Um, so like my first printer was an Ender Creality from Creality Ender 3 Pro.
And that
But
was a
they now
filament
have,
printer.
yeah, filament printer. So
Hmm.
the filament printer, they now actually have the Ender 3 V2 out,
Mm.
which is, I was talking about all the modifications that I'm doing.
Right.
A lot of the common modifications are actually come pre-done on the next one.
I mean, it kind of makes sense. If everybody out there is taking your product and tweaking it in this way, then the next time you make that same product or a version two of that product, just co-opt all those ideas. I
Yeah,
mean, it just
and
makes sense.
it's I think it's they're still coming out like $10 cheaper than what I bought my original one for. So it's
Oh, interesting.
which is crazy. So because all the prices just keep coming down, so you can even buy one of the ones like I have or the V1 for less,
Hmm.
which is pretty awesome. Uh, and yeah, it's got like some of the stuff like that I did. Like I did belt tighteners. Like you would have to like manually stretch it and tighten the Allen screws down. I did like ones that I could thumb screw tighten. Now that comes with it. Some of the fans and stuff are a little bit better. I believe the quiet running board is standard now too.
And
So
when you
yeah,
say board, you mean like a motherboard?
yeah, the motherboard. So
Yeah.
like one the motherboard I replaced on mine, like so normally for the 3D printers they make a lot of noise with the stepper motors whirling up and down.
Back and
Yeah,
forth a lot. Yeah.
yep. Right now mine's completely silent except for the fans.
Huh.
And
And
that
that's
was
just a different motherboard giving different instructions so the stepper motors work differently,
they figured out a way to properly send current to the stepper motors in a way that kept them from making sound. And
making
yeah,
so
I
much
mean,
noise. That's cool.
I thought it was like, oh, silent, but it's silent. Like there's
Yeah, yeah.
no noise coming from, other than like the physical sound of the stuff moving,
Sure.
but you do not hear the whir of the stepper motors anymore. So it cut down like 15 decibels off the sound of my 3D printer, which
Wow,
is
nice.
not insignificant.
Yeah, yeah.
Would be what,
Absolutely. Especially in
3?
the house or whatever.
Yeah. So it used
Yeah.
to be that I could hear it all the time upstairs, and now I can kind of hear the fan if I listen to it.
Yeah.
And you could go for a lighter fan too, but from my understanding, fans usually are the noise is kind of proportional to the amount of air they're moving.
Hmm.
So to get really quiet, you're actually hurting the amount of air, which is not always a good thing.
Sure.
So I've kind of just been like, it's good enough for me. But
Yeah, I mean, you expect there to be some sound. It is manufacturing things out
right.
of basically a big strip of plastic. So, I mean, there's
Mhm.
something, I get that.
So big tangent, but yeah, I would recommend
Yeah,
Ender
yeah.
Reality and Ender 3. And there's some other ones out there that you might want to look at, but that's got a great community around it. Lots of mods, lots of support for
Hmm.
that. So I would start there if you're going to FDM. And then if you're going with the resin, I love my Elegoo Mars. I've got the Pro, and now there's a Elegoo Mars version 2. I believe is coming out this month
Hmm.
for basically the same price as the Pro. Has a lot of the features that I wanted with the Pro, with like the filter and stuff like that. So, and I believe actually it's a monochromatic screen versus a true LCD screen, so
Hmm.
that it actually prints faster because it's can do the light better somehow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean,
Engineering.
it's probably, yeah. I don't exactly understand that, but yeah, sort of. I guess it makes sense. It's got less to do because it's a monochromatic screen as opposed to
Well, and I think
RGB screen, I suppose.
it's a true like that color, like the whatever
Hmm.
like the white light versus red, green, blue, trying to make white.
Yeah,
I
I
think
can
is
see
why
that.
it's faster.
And then, and you're also starting to see some of these resin printers now that are starting to talk about having 4K screens so that they're even finer detail because the screens are the pixels are so much smaller. I mean, because that's really what you're doing is you're projecting a picture of the slice of each complete tiny little slice of the entire object onto the underside. Well, it's technically the top of the image because it's being pulled upside down onto the fluid. And
Right.
so the higher resolution that image can be, the less you're going to see little tiny potentially pixels. I don't know what you would call them in that situation, but yeah, you
Yeah,
can get a lot smoother transitions and stuff like that.
and just like TV screens, the
Hmm.
4K, depending on how big you're printing, may or may not even be noticeable for
Sure, right.
sort of like phones when they went to like the Retina screen and then like the Super Retina. Like
Right, yeah.
for me, I was like, yeah, I can't really tell, but
Gets to a point where yeah, it's a diminishing returns and you
it
can't tell
looks
the
yeah,
difference,
it
but
looks really good, but
yeah,
um,
yeah.
so
Like we probably won't. I don't know. I don't know if we'd ever see any 8K screens on printers, especially when you've got a build plate that's only like a 5x7 or whatever. I mean, it kind of seems
but
silly.
well, and that's the other thing. They are getting bigger now. Like Elegoo's got the Saturn,
Yep.
that's in limited release right now, but that's about the same size as the Ender's build plate. I think it's a 200 by 200, whereas
Yeah.
the Ender's like 220 by 220. So I mean, darn near
So,
FDM size.
but you're going to need a lot more resin and the whole deal and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, but yeah, if you do want to print either more stuff quickly, or if you want to print just things that are physically larger, then yeah, I think we're going to see more of that. Like you're right. Like right now, most resin printers are like on the desktop. They are what are they? Maybe a foot square by maybe 2 feet high, or a little bit bigger than that.
200. See, I'm gone fully metric now. So,
I'm just talking about the machine itself, the overall like how much space it takes on the desktop.
oh yeah,
Is it like a yeah?
2 foot by 2 foot square for an FDM,
Mm-hmm.
and up, probably foot and a half, foot to foot and a half wide, square by twice that for resin.
Hmm. Okay.
And then like,
So yeah, they don't take up tons of space, but
and did you saw did you I send you that thing with the new Creality printer, the end like the where it has no height restriction?
I don't know. How does it not have a height restriction? You got the
So it's I mean, technically it probably does, but
I mean like the ceiling, I suppose.
well, it's built. They've built it onto a conveyor belt. So versus
Huh.
the build plate is a conveyor belt, and it's built at like an angle, so it's building everything at like a 45 and feeding it down on the conveyor belt, so it can just keep going. And they showed it like it could print like 8 of the same model just again and again and again and again,
Huh.
or it can print super tall models on that.
Like we are frankly in just the beginning of this whole shebang with the 3D printing, and because of that, we're we're going to look back in 5 years at this stuff and just be like, wow. Excuse
Yeah,
me.
it's gonna be
Yeah.
like looking at dial-up modems and like, hey, remember
Oh, yeah,
when
yeah.
we had to do this thing versus, just like I just yelled at I went to Renegade's website and it said, "Give me Power Rangers," and it just printed it to me, and I had to
Right, yeah.
power.
I mean, we're in a situation, like I said, like right now, within the last year and a half, resin printers have changed wildly, and and gotten cheaper and better, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, we're going to keep seeing this accelerating. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that you should be like, well, I'm going to wait till the best one comes out, because that's not going to happen. It's just like my dad was always like, I'm going to wait till they make the best computer, then we'll buy that one.
Any day
But
now.
yeah, no, absolutely. But it's a situation of like just kind of deciding at which point you've decided. And again, I would tell you, if you're interested, do a bunch of research and also ask your friends and see if they have them. Because if you just want to get a printer because you want to print some things, you might just want to get those STL files to your friend and say, hey, can you print these? And then you pay your friend, and then and you don't need to worry about it. But if you are interested in the process and you see yourself making this maybe even like a little kind of a side business, if you want to go down that road, or you just really love the ability to find cool STL files for all kinds of things out there. I mean, there's lots and lots of Patreons that you can get involved with, where there are people who are sculptors, digital sculptors, who like every month you pay them $8 and you get 10 new models, and they're like Dungeons and Dragons style models. And so you can go, oh, that's really cool. And you can help to support them. Plus you can get all kinds of cool stuff. But there's also places, My Mini Factory is one that I can think of, where you can buy like a la carte models from a lot of those Patreons, like a couple months
Yeah,
after the Patreon.
they're really good quality. Yeah, they almost always cost money on there.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't recommend those as being your first ones out the gate, usually because they're a little bit more finicky.
They can be, yeah, certainly.
But I mean, phenomenal looking models.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
But there's also other companies out there like, well, I mean, if you're talking about free generally, Thingiverse is probably one of the biggest out on the internet. And it is kind of just like you type in words and then you get STLs. Like it's a big, huge search engine for all these crazy STLs. And
Yeah, usually
are they all free, or are they mostly free?
Thingiverse is all free.
Okay, all right.
And then it's almost like it's kind of like GitHub as far as like GitHub does have a paywall. But as far as like it's free, and then you can there's people that go and take a design and they'll
tweak it
and make it slightly different or modify it and make it better, and it's a bunch of cool stuff.
It's got an open source kind of vibe to it, definitely.
Yeah,
and plus also people post pictures of like, hey, this is the file that's here, and this is what I did with it when I printed it, and I didn't even tweak it, but this is how it looks, and I painted it or whatever, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Good comment section where you can ask the creator of the file about printing or and stuff like that. So
yeah, absolutely. And then if you want to start making your own kind of 3D sculpts to some degree, the one place that both you and I have started with is something called Tinkercad, CAD, CAD, for computer aided design. Is that what CAD stands for?
Yep.
Okay. So Tinkercad runs in a browser. So it works on anything that has a browser. Works on Mac, Linux, Windows, whatever. And and it's free.
And then that's probably the only main drawback. I mean, one, it's not super detailed. It's it is more of a simplistic one. But it is online only versus like a SketchUp or
yeah. Like if you don't have any internet or something like that, it's problematic. But otherwise, yeah. But it is also a good place to start too.
Honestly. Yeah, I would definitely start there. And then Blender is really good for doing more like organic modeling and stuff like that, or more high end modeling.
But even if you're just trying to like build a weird part, like you've got some game and it just needs, a special kind of divider, you could easily do something like that in Tinkercad. All kinds of different little pieces and things like that you kind of start with and get your idea, get it under your belt, figure out kind of how 3D modeling works and all that kind of stuff. And then if you really start to dig it, then maybe you move into some other software and that kind of thing, and then maybe eventually you have a Patreon and then you make a whole bunch of money. I was looking at one not too long ago, a company called Titan Forge, I think, out of Poland. And they've got like a $10 Patreon. So for $10 every month, you get 20 to 30 new models every month in STL format that you can then download and print. And they've got like, last I looked, and this was maybe a couple of months ago, they had like 6,000 people signed up at $10 a head. So that's 60 grand a month that they're making on this. I mean, admittedly, it's not just one person; it's a group, and
Right.
so there's salaries and stuff that needs to be paid and everything. But it's a
Sure.
great way for 3D sculptor folks to be able to be like, I just want to sell directly to the end user. There never used to be that. You always had to work with the client to 3D sculpt something that they were going to get 3D printed and then turn into injection molded plastic, and it was going to end up in a game or something. Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it's very cool.
Yeah, if you're out there, if you're a game designer, this is a great way to prototype some stuff into your game. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really interested in seeing somebody produce a PDF downloadable game that also sells with with STL downloadable files. So you basically, I can ship you the entire miniatures game via email, and you get it, in the middle of the night
Already
on the
done.
sleep. Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. Yeah.
Fat Dragon Games, the one of the ones I use, they have a full war game. All the models, they're actually on the version 2 of the game. They've kind of redid some of their models and was feedback and redid those. And yeah, the rules are all online and everything.
So they got a rule set too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's very cool. Yeah, because I mean, I know that there's plenty of PDF only kind of rule sets out there, and I'm just like, eventually somebody's going to do both at the same time versus rules over here.
All the models there, and
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, and their models are pretty cool because I believe it's still true for that game, but all their normal models, like their figures and stuff, are all supportless.
So like sculpted in a way that they don't need supports, really.
Absolutely, yeah, and they're made for FDM printers. So if even if you print, like I've got a dragon from their last Kickstarter, I've got a big cool dragon coming that looks amazing, and yeah, I don't have to put any supports in it, and I can print it on my filament printer.
Wow, like a bunch of different multiple parts, or is it all one piece?
It is one piece.
That'll be crazy. I'm interested in seeing that. Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's if you're interested in this type of stuff, now isn't a pretty interesting time to be alive because there's so much that's going on in the world of 3D printing.
Oh, and like
within tabletop.
Every 6 months you see new stuff that somebody's figured out. There's a way out there to modify your printer now so that rather than having the little lines that make it look like a map. What is those types of maps?
Topographical map.
Topographical map. So rather than making your filament prints look like that, if they've got curves to it, it actually follows the curves.
Yeah. So instead of being just all the lines being completely straight, the lines actually follow. So I've seen that. Yeah, the print head actually moves up and down as it moves along the. And that just helps to hide those kind of very straight lines that can really kind of break up and make an organic shape not look very organic.
Yeah,
and that you showed me that. That was very cool.
Yeah, some guys just kind of hypothesized it, figured it out, and then I believe the Prusa software, which is open source, included it within like a week. Somebody had it in there. So
right, yeah, because that's the thing is that's literally just a software fix. Like the machine could already do that, they just didn't have the software for it. Now they do. So yeah, no, that's very interesting. That stuff is really neat, and it's. Again, because things are so digital in that place, that they can move very quickly, and you can see results very quickly, which is cool.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you got anything else about 3D printing, Matt?
I could talk all day, but
yeah, sure. Yeah.
For getting started, I think we've done well.
Yeah, I think so. So it's something to look at definitely if you're interested, or like I said, if you got a friend, maybe start looking at who's got the 3D printing stuff already, got a 3D printer, as opposed to just having a friend. I mean, it's nice to have a friend, but it's even nicer if they've got a 3D printer. But you could also start looking at a lot of the STL files that are out there and a lot of the different places, because like there's so many models that you can get at your local game store, but there's a near infinite number more from the internet now that you can get that do maybe exactly specifically what you want, as opposed to, just buying whatever they have that's close enough at the game store. So that's very cool. All right. Well, thanks again for listening to this episode of the GameFor Podcast. If you've got questions or comments and you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment below. If you're listening via your favorite podcast player or just aren't into the whole YouTube comment section thing, then you can feel free to reach out to us via email at podcast@iamgamefor.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And check out our website at www.iamgamefor.com. That is www.iamgamefor.com. GameForPodcast.com. Thanks.